the instant. If I am no longer anything but a body, barely a place in the sun, and the instant that measures my breath, then I am released from all worries, fears, as well as regrets. Nothing moves me. Nothing matters to me. I attach myself only to this minute that my life is filling up. That alone is a tangible prey, a presence. Only the impression of that moment exists. There are empty moments that are only a sort of connecting fabric between the full moments. We patiently let them roll by, and in the instants of fullness, we will find ourselves satisfied, fulfilled. It's the moral of Aristippus, that of Horace's Carpe Diem, and Gide's The Fruits of the Earth. Let us turn away from the world, from undertakings and conquests. Let us devise no more projects. Let us remain at home, at rest at the heart of our enjoyment. But is enjoyment rest? We will find it in us. And can it ever fulfill us? Enough, no more! 'Tis not so sweet now as it was before, says the Duke of Mantua to the musicians at the beginning of Twelfth Night. The sweetest melody, repeated indefinitely, becomes an annoying refrain. The taste at first delicious soon sickens me. An unchanging enjoyment that stays the same for too long is no longer felt as a plenitude. In the end it merges with a perfect absence. For enjoyment is the presence of an object to which I feel present. It is the presence of the object and of myself in the heart of their difference. But as soon as the object is handed over to me, the difference dissolves. There is no longer an object, but once again a single, empty existence that is but vapidity and ennui. As soon as I eliminate the distance that, in separating me from the object, allows me to throw myself toward it, to be movement and transcendence, this fixed union of the object and me no longer exists except in the way a thing does. The Stoic can rightly put pleasure as well as pain among those realities that are foreign and indifferent to me, since he defines them as a simple state that I can passively allow to continue within me. But in reality, enjoyment is not a given fixed in the narrow envelope of the instant. Gide tells us that each pleasure envelops the entire world. The instant implies eternity. God is present in the sensation. Enjoyment is not a separation from the world. It assumes my existence in the world. And first of all it assumes the world's past, my past. A pleasure is even more precious if it is newer, if it stands out more intensely against a uniform background of time. But the instant limited to itself alone is not new. It is only new in its relationship with the past. That figure that just appeared is only distinct if the ground that supports it is itself distinct as ground. At the side of the sunny road, the coolness of the shade is most precious, and a break is relaxing after tiring exercise. From the top of the hill, I look at the path traveled, and the entire path is present in the joy of my success. The walk gives the rest its worth, and my thirst gives the glass of water its worth. The whole past comes together in the moment of enjoyment, and I don't just contemplate it. To enjoy a good thing is to use it, to throw oneself with it toward the future. To enjoy the sun or the shade is to feel its presence as a slow enrichment. I feel my strength being reborn in my relaxed body. I rest in order to leave again. While looking at the path traveled, I look at those valleys toward which I am going. I look at my future. All enjoyment is project. It surpasses the past toward the future, toward the world that is the fixed image of the future. To drink cinnamon-flavored chocolate, says Gide in Incidences, is to drink Spain. Any perfume, any countryside that charms us, throws us beyond itself, outside of ourselves. Reduced to itself, it would only be an inert and foreign existence. As soon as it falls back onto itself, enjoyment becomes ennui again. There is no enjoyment except when I leave myself and engage my being in the world through the object that I am enjoying. The psychasthenics that Yannet describes only experience a feeling of indifference before the most beautiful sights, because no action forms within them. Flowers are no longer made to be plucked and smelled, paths no longer to be followed. The flowers seem made of painted metal. The countryside is no longer anything but a facade. There is no longer any future, no longer any surpassing, no longer any enjoyment. The world has lost all of its depth. If man wants to rest in himself, and tear himself away from the world, then he must renounce even enjoyment. The Epicureans knew this well. They scorned the pleasure of movement in order to preach only the pleasure of repose, pure ataraxia. And even better, the Stoics demanded that the wise man renounce even his body. Nothing is mine, they thought, but my pure interiority. I no longer have an exterior. I am but a naked presence that even pain cannot touch, an intangible upspringing, gathered in the instant, and knowing only that it exists. So there is no longer good nor evil facing me, nor anxiety within me. I am, and nothing means anything to me anymore. In this way, the pouting child withdraws into a corner and says, "I don't care about anything." But soon he looks around, he fidgets, he gets bored. When life withdraws into itself, it is not peaceful ataraxia, but the anxiety of indifference that flees from itself, that tears itself away from itself, that appeals to the other. All the unhappiness of men arise from one single fact, that they cannot stay quietly in their own chamber, says Pascal. But what if he cannot remain there? If he avoided all diversions, man would then find himself at the heart of what Valéry calls the pure ennui of living. And, as Valéry says, this purity instantly stops the heart. But is it then fitting to talk about diversions, and to say, along with Valéry, that it is reality in its pure state that would be discovered at the heart of ennui? Hegel has shown convincingly that reality should never be conceived as an interiority hidden in the depths of appearance. Appearance hides nothing. It expresses. Interiority is not different from exteriority. Appearance is itself reality. If man was only an atom of immobile presence, how would the illusion that the world is his, and the appearance of desires and worries be born within him? If he is conscious of desiring and fearing, man desires and fears. If Pyrrhus's being was a being at rest, he wouldn't even be able to think about leaving. But he does think about it. As soon as he thinks about it, he has already left. Man is a being of faraway places, says Heidegger. He is always somewhere else. There exists no privileged spot in the world about which he can safely say, "This is me." He is constitutively oriented towards something other than himself. He is himself only through relationships with something other than himself. Man is always infinitely more than he would be if he were reduced to what he is in the instant, says Heidegger. Every thought, every look, every tendency is transcendence. This is what we have seen by considering enjoyment. It envelops the past, the future, the entire world. The man lying in the shade at the top of the hill is not only there, on that piece of earth that his body embraces, he is present to those hills that he perceives. He is also in the faraway cities as someone who is absent. He rejoices in this absence, even if he closes his eyes and tries to think about nothing more. He feels like himself in contrast with a background of immobile and unconscious heat in which he bathes. He cannot suddenly spring forth into the world in the pure selfness of his being, without the world suddenly springing forth in front of him. It is because man is transcendence that it is so difficult for him to ever imagine any paradise. Paradise is rest, and it is transcendence abolished. The state of things that is given does not have to be surpassed. But, then, what shall we do there? In order for the air there to be breathable, we must leave room for actions and desires. We must have to surpass it in its turn. It must not be a paradise. The beauty of the promised land is that it promised new promises. Immobile paradises promise us nothing but an eternal ennui. Pyrrhus speaks of resting only because he lacks imagination. Once returned home, he will hunt, he will legislate, he will go to war again. If he tries to stay truly at rest, he will only yawn. Literature has often described the disappointment of the man who has just attained the ardently desired goal. And after that, one cannot fulfill a man. He is not a vessel that docilely allows itself to be filled up. His condition is to surpass everything given. Once attained, his plenitude falls into the past, leaving that constant emptiness of the future of which Valéry speaks, gaping open. Such are the passionate lovers described by Marcel Arland or Jacques Chardon. They wish to settle down forever at the heart of their love, and soon, enclosed in their solitary retreat, without having stopped loving each other, they get desperately bored. Happiness is nothing more than this, then, says the heroine of Foreign Lands. Each object, each instant, reduced to its immediate presence, is not enough for a man. He is himself not enough for himself, since he is always infinitely more than he would be if he were only that. To live a love is to throw oneself through that love toward new goals. A home, a job, a common future. Since man is project, his happiness, like his pleasures, can only be projects. The man who has made a fortune immediately dreams of making another. Pascal said it perfectly. It is not the hare that interests the hunter, it's the hunt. One is wrong to reproach a man for struggling for a paradise in which he would not wish to live. The goal is the goal, only at the end of the path. As soon as it is attained, it becomes a new starting point. The socialist wants the advent of the socialist state, but if that state were given to him at the outset, he would desire something else. From within the state, he would invent other goals. A goal is always the meaning and the result of an effort. Separated from that effort, no reality is a goal, but only a given, made to be surpassed. This does not mean that only the struggle counts, that the stakes do not matter, as is sometimes said, because the struggle is a struggle for the stakes. If the stakes are taken away from it, the struggle loses all meaning and all truth. It is no longer a struggle, but a stupid marching in place. The serious mind claims to separate the end from the project that defines it, and to recognize in it an intrinsic value. He believes that values are in the world, before man. Without him, man would only have to pick them up. But Spinoza, and Hegel, more definitively, have already dissipated this illusion of false objectivity. There is a false subjectivity that, in a symmetrical movement, claims to separate the project from the end and to reduce it to a simple game, a diversion. It denies that any value exists in the world because it denies man's transcendence and wants to reduce him to his immanence alone. A man who desires, and who lucidly starts an undertaking, is sincere in his desires. He wants an end. He wants it at the exclusion of any other end. But he does not want it in order to stop there, to enjoy it. He wants it in order for it to be surpassed. The notion of end is ambiguous, since every end is a point of departure at the same time. But this does not prevent it from being seen as an end. Man's freedom resides in this power. This very ambiguity seems to authorize the irony of the humorist. Isn't Pyrrhus absurd to leave in order to return home? Isn't the tennis player absurd to hit a ball in order for someone to send it back to him? And the skier absurd to climb a slope in order to immediately come back down? Not only does the goal conceal itself, but the successive goals contradict each other, and the undertaking is completed only in destroying itself. But here the humorist uses a sophism. He decomposes all human activity into elementary acts, whose juxtaposition appears contradictory. If he completed the decomposition to recover the pure instant, then all contradiction would disappear. Only a shapeless incoherence would remain, a pure contingency that would neither outrage nor astonish. But he is cheating. He remains the existence of partial meanings that oppose each other at the heart of the ensemble whose global meaning he rejects. One says that the skier only climbs up in order to come down. Then one is admitting that he climbs, that he comes down, that his movements do not follow each other randomly, but aim for the top of the hill or the bottom of the valley. One therefore grants the existence of synthetic significations toward which every element transcends itself. But it is then a purely arbitrary decision to reject the idea of a greater ensemble where the ascent and the descent surpass themselves toward a walk or an exercise. It is not up to the humorist to decide. It is up to the skier. Pyrrhus would be absurd if he left in order to return home, but it is the humorist who introduces this finality here. He does not have the right to extend Pyrrhus's project farther than Pyrrhus has settled upon. Pyrrhus is not leaving in order to return. He is leaving in order to conquer. That undertaking is not contradictory. A project is exactly what it decides to be. It has the meaning that it gives itself. One cannot define it from the outside. It is not contradictory. It is possible and coherent as soon as it exists, and it exists as soon as a man makes it exist. In this way, wisdom for man does not consist of withdrawing into oneself. The wise man himself, who advises the immobility of rest to his disciples, contradicts this advice by giving it. He should not say anything. He should not find himself disciples. Epicurus preaches ataraxia, but he preaches, and he preaches that it is necessary to preach. He preaches friendship. Neither does the Stoic remain stiffly in an independent freedom, resting uselessly upon itself. He teaches all men the power of their freedom, and even when the wise man avoids loudly proclaiming the value of silence, he never succeeds in maintaining himself at the heart of himself, and maintaining the world around him in an equal indifference. It doesn't matter to him whether he eats or fasts, governs an empire, or lives in a barrel, but he still must choose. He eats or fasts. He rules or abdicates. Here lies the disappointing character of every conversion. I judge the movement of my transcendence to be futile, but I cannot prevent it. Time continues to flow by. The instants push me forward. So I am wise. And what will I do now? I live, even if I judge that life is absurd, like Achilles always catching up with the tortoise despite Zeno. Each man decides on the place he occupies in the world, but he must occupy one. He can never withdraw from it. The wise man is a man among men, and his very wisdom is a project of himself.